Šta se dešava sa našim ličnostima onog trenutka kada internet i virtualna digitalna sfera, kako hoćete, počinje da u svakom gotovo smislu dominira našim životima? Ko smo mi, ko postajemo, kako doživljavamo sami sebe, kako doživljavamo druge ljude i u realnom svijetu i u virtualnom svijetu, koji su možda potencijali, dobri potencijali razvoja tehnologije, razvoja veštačke inteligencije, a šta je jedna od njihovih najvećih opasnosti, naime opasnost od razvijanja zavisnosti koje bojim se da smo svi u manjoj ili većoj meri već razvili. O svemu ovome i još mnogo čemu, na moje veliko zadovoljstvo, ponovo razgovaramo sa Hans-Georgom Mulerom, profesorom filozofije u Makau u Kini. Pre nego što uđemo u epizodu, kao i obično, zamolila bih vas da nas zapratite ovdje, da nas zapratite na društvenim mrežama i upalite dugme za obaveštenja. Moje ime je Andrea Jovanović, a gledate podcast Lukavstvo Uma. Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of Cunning of the Reason. As I told you in the introduction, our very dear guest today is Hans-Georg Muler, and we will talk about something that in maybe a different manner we have already touched upon the first time he was guest in Lukavstvo, so I will refer all of you to our first episode. I will link it in the first comment. So it's actually the episode about the concept that Georg introduced himself, that is called profilicity. So if some of you haven't already watched it, you can watch it now. Georg, welcome to Cunning of Reason.
Thank you for having me again, Andrea. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Same. It's the same. So I've been thinking lastly a lot about, I guess probably all of us are, our personalities online and our subjectivities in virtual world versus in real world. And I think it's just a topic that people think about all the time, maybe not in theoretical abstract manner, but it's just so much part of our lives today. So you're, I think, the perfect person to address this type of issues. So I will start with my first, let's say, question. So if we all know that personality today is being formed and continuously shaped within relations with invisible audiences, sometimes visible, but most anonymous or unknown to us on the one hand, and very strict algorithms on the other. What is left of subject? Can we still talk about personality as subjectivity, or subject is no longer, let's say, the term we should use to understand our personalities?
That's of course a very good question, very broad question actually. You already referred to like my previous work where I introduced the notion of profilicity, and the key argument was that we're basically transitioning from authenticity to profilicity. I call these different identity technologies. So the idea is exactly in the terminology that you were using, that let's say our identity becomes more of a feedback mechanism. We're not really trying to discover our deep individual, authentic, or original self, or to create it for that matter, but we're kind of developing it in a kind of constant feedback loop, which now increasingly takes part online. But the question you are asking is not really about identity, but it's about subjectivity. And that's, of course, it's closely related, but it's also somewhat different. And like in my recent work, I published a video on my channel about this on AI and the relation between AI and selfhood. And I think we can also understand subjectivity as, let's say, a form of selfhood. And I think that is now fundamentally being challenged, subjectivity or selfhood, in the sense that when we are talking to AI, and we are increasingly talking to AI, and we increasingly kind of getting our information on everything. We're getting somehow the truth about everything from AI. So AI becomes a very relevant conversation partner, and in many ways more relevant than that's philosophical terminology, traditional philosophical terminology, our intersubjective conversation partners. Of course, we still have intersubjective communication, like you and I right now, to an extent. But at the same time, at least when it comes to whatever, for instance, making important decisions, we increasingly trust non-subjective communication partners more, namely AI. And people now asking AI about everything, right? Not just about like the tasks in their jobs, but also whatever, how to communicate with others. And again, like about the truth, and they trust AI in a sense more. It's more, it seems to be more, how to say, in a sense, more knowledgeable than human subjects. So that is a deep challenge, I guess, to this concept of intersubjectivity. That intersubjectivity is no longer, let's say, the prime source for relevant communication. And in that video that I posted on my channel, I am kind of experimenting with an idea that came to me by reading this book by Julian Jaynes, which was written in the 1970s. Maybe I cut this short a little bit. We don't have that much time. But anyways, Jaynes is coming up with this kind of crazy hypothesis that people, until about 3,000 years ago, wouldn't think in the subjective first-person mode. They wouldn't perceive their own thoughts as being thought and spoken by themselves, but consciousness would operate, the mind would operate, doesn't call it consciousness, by basically hearing voices that were produced in the mind, but these voices were not perceived as one's own voices, but as the voices of gods. Like something like, you were just, instead of thinking
Spirits
your own thoughts.
And yeah.
And so that's kind of interesting that because that's a pre-subjective mode of thinking, right? So if Jaynes' theory is true, and I think there's a lot of evidence that it is to some extent true, namely to that very extent that subjectivity has not been always the default mode of thinking. So that we could, and still, I mean, Jaynes also points to such phenomena today. His main example are schizophrenics. But there are also other examples, like religious people, right, who hear somehow voices. Or other example is whatever, like artists or so, who feel like an inspiration, and when they create something, it is not really experienced as a subjective creation. So it seems to be the case that this kind of mode of subjectivity by which the mind operates, by which thinking operates, is not really the default mode, as I just said, of thinking, but that it has been preceded by something like an outsourcing, imagined outsourcing of relevant thoughts. And it seems to me now that with AI, we are kind of entering a similar future, where we are also basically no longer perceiving or the most important decisive thoughts, the most relevant thoughts, as produced by another subject, but rather we are the recipient of this kind of information, and there we can't ascribe this information to any specific subject anymore. So that seems like very much a deep threat to this kind of, as I said, default position that thinking and important conversation, decision-making, is dependent on intersubjectivity. So we're kind of re-entering a phase in which thinking and decision-making is no longer let's say, structured in the subjective or intersubjective mode. So when we communicate with AI, we perceive AI as intelligent. That's what we call it, even though I think it is not. It's basically just a collection of data, which is based on human communication, and then through very complex form of computing, creates artificial communication. But this artificial communication is, of course, relevant. But we're not ascribing it to the gods anymore. We are ascribing it to some form of artificial intelligence, and we kind of reifying this machine that is capable of computing data in such a way that it produces meaningful communication. And that really challenges this kind of notion of subjectivity. And I find that is a very interesting development.
It's an interesting analogy, and I just have a small sub-question, let's say, to this. If we agree, but it's not the only interpretation, but mostly, at least in Europe, especially after the, let's say, modern philosophy revolution and turning to subjective powers of knowledge and, let's say, starting with Descartes, but it is a very important part of Western philosophy. We usually prescribed some concept of being active to being subject, some type of entrepreneurship, and I'm using this word in neutral sense, not in capitalistic sense. Yeah. So if we are now going back to this more passive way of seeing subject, what do you think in our everyday lives can be the consequences of that? So if, for example, like 300 years ago, someone would do something because someone thought that is how it's supposed to be done because it is God's will. And today it is what ChatGPT said.
Right.
But sometimes ChatGPT is just only repeating what we want to hear, but that's the other issue.
Of course,
so,
that
what's
was the
happening
same
with our
God as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is a very good question. And I guess the key term for this is agency.
Agency, right? I couldn't remember.
And but you are right in connecting this with entrepreneurship, because of course this notion of agency has a lot to do with the transition to modernity and the transition to capitalism and the idea of free market. And I think this notion of agency is highly overrated. So in this sense, I think it is a good thing, both like, let's say, existentially, but potentially even politically, to kind of challenge this notion of the, let's say, all omnipotent, all-powerful agency, right? And that I think it's a good thing that we may become more humble. I mean, now we know, unlike in the previous religious stage when we were communicating with the gods, we basically now know, which has always been the case also in the religious stage, that we are communicating basically with ourselves in the plural, right? I mean, these data that AI is using to produce its communication are our collective kind of data. And we somehow see in this context that, again, agency is and has never been really something that is primarily individual. So I think the good thing about these developments is that we can maybe challenge our own overestimation of individualism. And that might even have a lot of political let's say, potential, right? That we understand that wisdom is, in a sense, for lack of a better word, collective, and that knowledge is collective, or knowledge production is collective. And so challenging this kind of monopoly and this worshipping, in a sense, of the individual, which has replaced the worshipping of the gods, And that might have like fundamental consequences, fundamental consequences for all our political and legal and economic institutions, because in a sense they're all based on worshiping and protecting this belief in the agency of the individual, of empowering the individual. But in a sense, we now understand that's kind of counterfactual, right? The power of agency is very limited, and individuality is very limited, and it's not, the key to everything, and not the key to human knowledge production and to creativity and to intelligence. So I see a lot of potential in these new technologies. I haven't really heard many people talking about it, but because most of the people have more like dystopian visions about that. Unlike, of course, the Chinese, for instance, in China, the attitude is very different in the West. And I think the reason why this attitude is very different in the West, why AI is less experienced as a threat, is because, of course, here this kind of paradigm of individualism is not as deeply rooted, let's say, as it is in the West.
Yeah, so maybe it is the West that is losing its individual identity, not as much as individuals in the West. Let's go to the next question. It's a bit connected to this, but not that much. But it is something that I find very interesting and important. So already with the creation of the mass internet, and then introduction of social media, and introduction of different applications where almost everything we do now is connected to the internet, even television, right? So there was a promise of fluidity. So, and we do here even today, social media is making lives more fluid, more faster. Everything is changing. You have that open space to do whatever you want, and almost with no consequences, and so on and so on. And on the other hand, we know, it was always known, but now it's explicitly known, that social media and other internet applications are working on a very strict procedures, constant categorization, algorithmic predictions, behavioralistic analysis. It's a perfect machine for sale. So this is one of other reasons why this is being done like this. So it's a bit, maybe not a paradox, but there is some tension between this idea of fluid, wonderful online world and actually how strict and deterministic to a certain degree that world is. So my question would be, in that sense, is our subjectivity, however we understand it, maybe in terms of more collective, finding out that it was always a bit more collective than we thought, is it disappearing, or is it actually becoming very fixed, very rigid, and strictly created by online space?
I think this question, or this kind of distinction that you now introduced, fluid on the one hand and somehow on the other hand preset and pre-programmed, right? That is again somehow reflecting the prejudices of what I would call the age of authenticity, right? If something is pre-programmed and fixed, then again we lose kind of agency. And what you associate with fluidity is the possibility to be creative and so forth. And so in that sense, the question kind of is also based on that framework of authenticity, that somehow we were hoping that AI would enhance authenticity, but now we are afraid that actually how it works and we are getting manipulated by it and profiled and put into categories and so forth, that it actually diminishes our authenticity. Again, I'm trying to go beyond this very framework. And so I would suggest an alternative way of looking what happens in the face of AI. Again, in my terminology, which in this case I stole from Niklas Luhmann, I think that second order observation is a very important notion. And of course, the use of AI and the use of new media, which is very closely interrelated, enhance second order observation. So what we actually do is we no longer simply observe things in first order observation. We observe always how things are being observed. And that's a more complex way of observation. And of course, that also applies to how we see ourselves. So we see ourselves in the mode of how we are being observed constantly, whatever, when we are being fed our profiles and whatever, our YouTube suggestions and so forth. We kind of observe ourselves in the mode of a second order observation. And I think that is really the change that is happening. So I'm kind of rejecting that authenticity-based paradigm that was implied in your question. And I would see the changes much more as, and that is somewhat related to what I said earlier, to us, to the subject or so, being more, we see more perspectives at the same time. Right? We see a variety of perspectives. And again, I think that is at least potentially a very good thing. Right? And we see also different perspectives on ourselves. And there is no longer the need to kind of just go with one perspective. And in this sense, we see that these perspectives are always kind of developing. I'm not sure how this is related to the question, but I had an interesting discussion in the class I've been teaching here in Makau last week. And some of my students were telling me about a new kind of fiction that apparently now is very common, fan fiction. You're familiar with fan fiction? I mean, you're also in the literature. You used to be somehow, at least in the literature field. You're familiar with fan fiction?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So fan fiction is basically a fiction which is co-written by a community of fans, right?
Yes. And it's always like a spin-off of some existing, let's say, novel or story. Yeah, I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, I'm glad for you to explain it because you're probably much more familiar than I with it. So, but the thing is, again, we don't really have the author, the single author anymore, right? And we have this novelist developing by mutual second-order observations. And that is interesting because traditionally, again, on the model of authenticity, single authorship was like super important, right?
Yeah.
The most kind of thing you could aspire to as a young man, if you were growing up, or woman in the age of authenticity, was, at least that was how I grew up as a teenager, was like the aspiring to become a writer. And now in hindsight, I see that as, just this dream of becoming like 100 out of 100 authentic, right? And that is no longer the case. That is very interesting that with this kind of fan fiction, this authenticity kind of ideal, again, has been replaced with something like that is very much based on second order observation. And again, the interesting thing about second order observation is not only that it is much more dynamic, but not in an individualistic way. So there is fluidity, but not fluidity of the single agent, right? And there are categories to come back to your binary there, but it's not one category. It's like it's a kind of a multiplicity of categories, and they're kind of dynamically developing. But really, the most important thing is that you always just look at things in a more complex way, right? You don't have this kind of, you don't give preference to this kind of first-person perspective. You always see something in the way it is being observed by others, and in this way, it makes things in the world much more complex. And I also kind of like that. I also like then that we don't have to agree on one storyline, on one narrative, right? The narrative with fan fiction, we learn that all narratives are negotiable, and that they're all, this is my key word, that they're all contingent, right? We see like the contingency of the narratives, and also of our narratives about ourselves. And so this kind of natural is of course the wrong word, it's cultural, this kind of acculturation into the contingency, which you see something like in fan fiction, where the narratives, where you see all these kind of simultaneous possibilities of narratives, right? You see the contingency of all narratives. Again, I think that is, from a philosophical perspective, has a lot of potential.
I have a two-folded question. So let me first ask you this. Sometimes people, while analyzing the processes of development of AI, especially with deep learning and consequences of that process, for me it is interesting when they use AI not to analyze AI, but to use it to tell us something about ourselves already there. So, for example, my good friend Primož, Primož Krašovec, he's a sociologist from Ljubljana. He was guest here a few weeks ago, and he talked a bit on that point how we use this process of development of AI to understand our intelligence. So AI intelligence is actually telling us giving us some other perspective of understanding human intelligence. Right. So, and let's say analog to that, what I would like to ask you is everything you just said. And my question being full with the authenticity trap narrative already, do you think this is actually a novel that we are just and giving us new possibilities of figuring that out, or it has always been like that? In terms of, let's say, even in that like hyper individualistic 20th century story about genius author or genius scientist or whatever, maybe they didn't have internet and AI and everything that we do these days, but they still were to a certain degree framed with common language, common culture, common institutions, other people, relations with nature, other people, society, and so on. So do you maybe think this is actually not new? It's just it's easier for us to see it now.
I have a very simple answer to this, Andrea. It's yes. I fully agree with what you said.
Okay, good. So the second part of the question is, so now I have to play devil's advocate. Do you think that besides possibilities for us becoming more humble, to start with that one, but changing our understanding of us and our potentials, there is also a possibility of these systems being used in some manner that can be seen as totalitarian. I'm a communist, you know that I hate this word, but let's just to have totalizing effect, like let's say it like that. So in terms of, okay, we are now finally critiquing authenticity, as we are doing right now in this episode as well, and as you did in the last episode also, but maybe it's not talk about individual authenticity. Maybe it's just the totalization possibilities that the internet has on framing certain narratives, distinguishing between what is normal and what is not normal. Do you belong under this narrative or not? I mean, we can see cancel culture on the internet being still going strong, unfortunately. So do you see maybe, the possibility not only of good things, but not dystopian, just.
Yeah, of course, I also see many bad possibilities, not just good ones, but not necessarily the one that you were mentioning. I mean, it's rather the opposite, right? I mean, whatever, like here in China or so, right? Basically also this there's also a big diversity on the internet, right? And it's the opposite of totalitarian. It undermines totalitarian tendencies. And the same thing like with cancel culture. I mean, I'm so glad, whatever, for instance, with regard Western Europe, and Germany is number one, right? If not for the internet and new media, it would be like it would be a completely totalitarian society by now if you look at the mainstream media in Germany. I think the tendencies of the internet as such, and as it is fastly developing, are clearly anti-totalitarian. But that doesn't mean that there aren't like negative also aspects of it. What I see the most negative aspect, and again, that is something that is also very, very visible here in China, is that it is very much, and that has to do not so much with totalitarianism, but with capitalism, that it is highly addictive. And we all have become like high degree addicts, right? Where we are addicted to it all the time, and in everything we do, we become more addicted to this kind of life. And the first thing we do in the morning and the last thing we do at night is to use these devices and these technologies, and as I said earlier, we rely more and more on them. So that is, I think, for me, like coming again like from an existentialist philosophy, and also coming from background from Chinese philosophy, from Taoism, like suffering has a lot to do with the addictions that we are subjected to. And it seems to me that this is a very, very powerful addiction that, and we see like these things are very well documented, right? The rise of, for instance, I talked about this also in other videos, which in teenage girl suicide because of usage of Instagram and so forth, right? But we can also talk about other things, right? The disappearance of time, right? Acceleration of everything. And you mean, I also, and I lose, and for me it's worse than for you, because I have probably less time left in my life than you have. And now this kind of time is all taken up by constant by the constant necessity, whatever. Like I just get, and this is all nicely meant, I'm getting overwhelmed with the links that people send me, right?
Yes.
And I guess
the content all the time.
Yeah.
So it has to be
and it's not
happening.
just like fear of missing out, right? Which is of course also an aspect of this, the fear of missing out, which is a new phenomenon, but it's it's just like this kind of mismatch between the 24 hours we have each day, and this kind of accelerated system that we live in, and that eats up and at the same, that is highly addictive and eats up the lifetime we have so fast. So these are two existential deep problems that I see. And of course, then that has to do with the addiction thing, that's a political thing, as I said, has to do with capitalism, because the capitalism thrives on making people addicted. I mean, these machines are designed, including the AI that we use, including whatever, DeepSeek or how they talk to us, right? ChatGPT, right? They want to keep us on the platform, right? And that's the basic kind of principle of their operation. It is, to keep everyone as long as possible on the platform and make everyone completely addicted to them. And that is the main threat that I see, and that's less tied to different democratic or less democratic systems, but that's much more tied to the embedding of as Luhmann would say, the structural coupling between these new media and these new technologies and the capitalist economy.
I have just yesterday, by wasting my time on the internet, came across the short on YouTube where some psychologists, children's psychologists, talked about the importance of boredom in early lives of children. I think it's not only in our early life, right? It's at least as philosophers, we should know better than to exclude boredom from our lives.
Absolutely, yes.
What I didn't finish in my last question, actually forgot to say, when I talked about totalizing possibilities, I mostly thought about who or what controls this sphere. So we now know that there are like few peoples that are becoming, both in terms of the economic potentials they have, like capital, money, and in terms of their power to control so much of this. Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, so many of the so-called, some people call them new techno feudalists, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So in that regard, I was thinking about totalizing power if they actually would use it in that manner. Because
On the one hand, I fully agree with that. And you see how, incredibly rich these people are, and you see how much that increases the wealth gap. And so I think this techno-feudalism point is very well taken, and I do think that is a major problem, which again has very little to do with totalitarianism, but it has a lot to do with capitalism. That we've reached a state of where capitalism has become, so to speak, post-capitalist, and has turned into this tech feudalism, or is it called techno feudalism? I don't know. Anyways, Varoufakis wrote a book about it.
Varoufakis calls it like that.
And I think these points are very well taken. But this means not necessarily. Again, I'm not really believing that has to do both with my Taoist and my system theory Luhmann background. I don't really believe in the power of individual agents. You can also see it the other way around, that these new, extremely rich people, they're also addicted, and they become part of the machine, as also the feudal kings and lords, overlords have been. So on the one hand, yes, there are these horrible overlords that in a sense have a lot of power and definitely have a lot of money, but at the same time they are also products of the system within which they operate. So it's not that they are in any sense like free or have more like individual agency. They just definitely profit immensely from the system, but they're also a part of that system.
Yes,
and the controlling, from a systems theoretical point of view, but as I said, also from a Taoist point of view, we overestimate the notion of control, right? We are the notion of individual control.
Yeah,
and I do not think that these people are like literally like in this position of manipulating the whole world according to their own individual will, right? Because they are just functioning and, so to speak, executing the will of the system that controls them.
Yes, I completely agree with that. That is, by the way, one of my main points of disagreement with this techno-feudalism theory that is interesting, but it's still characteristics masks, as Marx called it in Capital, character masks. But what just to proceed on this late point, and we can maybe end with it. So if it is not only certain personalities, no matter how powerful or rich they are, what is controlling the system? Is their system controlling the system? And then we can go back to the first question we started with, and it is one of the all the Marxist question: is system subject itself, or there are subjects within the system? So, or it is a system without a subject. If you understand in which way I'm going.
Yes, the connection was interrupted on my side for a little
I'm sorry.
bit. No problem. I
Do you
think I
need to
understood your point nevertheless. And well, the systems are controlling themselves, but they're also controlling one another. There's a cybernetic circle. That's a Lumanian point, right? He uses this example of a thermostat, right? And you can say, well, via the thermostat, the heating system controls the room temperature, but you can also say via the thermostat, the room temperature controls the heating system, right? And in a similar way, you can say whatever the economy controls the media, or the media controls the economy, and so forth. We have we not only have two systems, we have like a multiplicity of systems that mutually control one another. And the key concept of systems theory is that there is no central control node. Of course, there are some systems that are more powerful than others, and whatever. Some systems are now not very powerful anymore that were very powerful in the past, let's say religion. Right. And others have become immensely more powerful. But nevertheless, we live in a complex environment, and control is never really just a one-way control. It's always, that brings us back to the beginning, it's within very complex feedback mechanisms. And our tendency, this kind of traditional Western metaphysical tendency to find like the first cause or the kind of divine intelligence that is in control of everything, and then we kind of use this thought model and impose it on how society is running. I think that's a flaw. That's a fallacy. That's a bad model.
Just to wrap it up, actually, I'm going to ask the question I first thought to skip, but now I think it comes together perfectly. One of the also Western philosophical notions was the difference between essence and appearance, which was very much used in the early days of social networking. Like we had this critique that always said these are only representation. Usually those, when you say representation in those terms, it was almost immediately connected to falsity, like it's something false about it. It's not true. It's not authentic. It's fake, right? Fakeness. And then there's our essence. So as time passed, I think that type of critique is not anymore so strong. Now it's just, okay, we have our essence and it is being represented in different ways online. But I believe that with everything we have just said in the last half an hour, do you think that recent developments in this regard are also problematizing this very dichotomy between so-called essence and so-called representation?
Yes, of course. I mean, this is also part of the old European metaphysics, and it's kind of completely outdated. It was already challenged within the history of Western philosophy, first with Kant, then with Hegel, then with Nietzsche. And so at least in this German philosophy, 18th, 19th century, it's basically already been deconstructed. But then even more with the actual deconstructivists and French deconstructivists, and also Luhmann, right? That completely goes beyond these old metaphysical categories that we've inherited from the Aristotelian, Platonic, and so forth tradition, and the Christian, very much so. And yeah, again, I think such concepts, mentioned second order observation earlier in the conversation, they are much more useful. Right, and we always see the observer, and we can see how the observer is conditioned by something. And again, like something like conditioning is what is conditioned by what in which way is a much better like conceptual framework than looking at the essence and appearance dichotomy.
Okay, Georg. Well, thank you so much. If you want to add anything else, if you think we missed something for now, okay.
Yeah, no, I just want to have dinner now.
I know. It's evening. It's evening at Makau. Okay, thank you so much for this conversation, and I'm also looking forward to having you here physically again. Not saying this is less essential.
So, yes. I'm also looking forward to being back in Belgrade. Always nice to be there.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for viewers and listeners for staying with us. If you have some questions or anything to add to our conversation, please do feel yourself conditioned to write the comments down below. Thank you, and bye-bye.